Okay, now let's move on to an exciting part of our program. 5 compelling paper presentations focusing on the challenges faced by the Hazara community, including genocide, marginalization, and poverty. For the first presentation, I would like to invite Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat, PhD student at the University of South Asia, to present his paper about marginalization and poverty, a thesis study of Hazaras in Afghanistan. Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat, the stage is with you.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? Just I
Yes,
need a
we can hear you.
confirmation.
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Yeah, just 1 minute so I could share my. Oh, so I cannot share my slides. So please, I send my slides. Please, the technical team share that. So, but we will start it anyway. As Professor Mali very convincingly argued that there is a possibility of a genocide in Afghanistan right now because there is no constitutional framework in the Taliban government, and it is all in the degrees and will of the Taliban leader that is counted. So, and he reminded us about how during the World War II in Germany, the same was the case, that on the Hitler's decrees and his monks worked was the case. So my assumption is that the genocide of the Hazara that took place in 1890s, it has had long-term effects and the lingering consequences for the Hazara ethnic groups. One of the consequences is poverty. Please move to the next slide. One of the consequences, the poverty. As you can see, if we try to study poverty among the ethnic groups in Afghanistan, we do not have good data to show us that which ethnic group is more poor than other or not. Of course, the whole country is a poverty-ridden country, but this is when it comes to subnational at the ethnic level, the Hazaras are the poorest. The slide that you see on your screen, it is based on, this slide is based on a survey by the Afghanistan Center for Statistics, and I think it was also published by H.S.A.I Foundation in 2018. This shows that this is the map of Kabul. So poverty is based on the Nohia or districts in Kabul. At that time, the poorest Nohia or district of Kabul was District 13, which was the highest level of poverty in this area, and that is Dashti Barchi and this Hazara ghetto in west of Kabul. So, and the same study, which was, surveyed, another city was Herat. In Herat also, the Hazara ghetto Jibril area was the poorest district in the city. So that is almost the only indicators that we have that, the Hazaras are more poor than other ethnic groups, than other major ethnic groups. So I'm not talking about Jats, who are maybe more than, more poor than the Hazaras. So that's my question. Why are Hazaras poorer compared to other ethnic groups in Afghanistan? I'm using as a methodology Bayesian analysis. In Bayesian analysis, we propose a couple of, or maybe more than a couple of hypotheses, and then we argue about those hypotheses, and we try to update our hypothesis based on the evidence that, this hypothesis is supported by this many evidence, and that's then this one that. So there is not, we cannot say that each hypothesis is completely wrong, but we see that weight of evidence in favor of each hypothesis. So please move to the next slide. I propose three explanation or three hypotheses first. I say, well, the Hazaras are poor because there are some cultural elements in them that makes them or keeps them poor. This has some relation with Weberian argument, which in his Protestant ethics, he argues that there are these elements in Protestant religion and Protestantism that help the Northern Europeans to develop more than others, more than Southern Europe, for example, more than the Catholics. So let's say if we put that argument in among the Hazaras, so let's say we can find some of the factors. For example, there is a capital flight from Hazara area, which goes when large number of people go to Iraq and Iran for visiting these religious sites, and they are taking lots of capital with them. You could say, well, this is instead of people investing it in their own area, they are taking it out of the country. So this is that's why one reason why the Hazaras are poor. This is an example, of course. So we could argue in that manner that there is this element of cultural element among the Hazaras. We could also put another argument, let's say religious taxes like zakat and homs, which is more than 1/5 or more than 20% of your annual earning will go to some religious organizations, and you do not get in exchange nothing for that. So, and this, you do not have capital, surplus capital to invest, but it is one way of sending the capital or paying, but you are not getting in exchange nothing. So it's not like more than taxes. One could make this argument that for the Hazaras are poor, but that is I think that's not enough of argument, because if you see now I'm in Europe and I see that people are paying lots of money to the churches and to religious organizations, and they are also during August, so the month of August, they are going everywhere and spending lots of money. So this is not a good argument on that sense. We also cannot say, well, because the Hazaras are lazy, they are not entrepreneurial, they are not working hard, so they are not hard working. Because Hazaras are very famous, when they are when it comes about hard working. So this is not a convincing argument, but of course, as I mentioned, there are some truth to that. So we move to the second hypothesis, which is geography. So let's say, well, Hazaras are poor because this is, and they are living in a mountainous area. They have long and cold winters, and there are droughts. So you could say, well, this is the reason why the Hazaras are poor. Well, still, there are some truth to that, but we could see that not always bad geography ends up making people poor. We have examples of course, there are differences, in other countries and regions of the world, where people who are living, in mountainous areas, they are comparatively sometimes more richer than those who are living in cities. Example of Switzerland, and sometimes you could say argue about Japan, or maybe when it comes to India, Kashmir, maybe I think it's more let's say richer than UP, for example, in India, on average. So not always bad geography keeps you poor, but because geography, you have lots of resources also in geography, and we could say the same about Hazaristan or Hazarajat, that we have enough resources. We have clean waters. We have most of the rivers from in Afghanistan. They are originating from the Hazarajat, and we have mines like coal. They are from Hazarajat, and we have maybe the largest iron mines in H.A.I and Bamiyan. So this is still, geography is a factor, but it is not, I think, the most important factor in why saying the Hazaras are poor. And now we move to, and based on the same survey which I showed you earlier, In that survey, Panjshir, which is also a mountainous province, is the richest province of Afghanistan. And Daikundi, which is also mountainous, is the poorest uh, province in Afghanistan. And that point leads us to the third hypothesis, and that is the state policies. Following the Abdurrahman's massacre in the years 1991 to 1994, there was land confiscation from the Hazaras. They were kicked out from their areas, their homes, and they migrated in large numbers to Central Asia, to Iran, and also to South Asia. Babur in his memoir Baburnama writes that he did not like a lot the Hazaras, and he had some fight with the Hazaras. He writes that these are the people who are making troubles for the caravans and for the people were traveling between Kabul and Kandahar in the same highway which is now, so in the same route. The Hazaras were making troubles for the people or for the caravans and also for businessmen and all. And that's why he attacked the Hazaras. Now we see that in the same area, Hazaras are victimized. Hazaras are getting killed in Kundi Pusht, and I think that's the biggest example of when the Hazaras were killed by the Taliban in their first role. So that's an example of how the Hazaras, lost their territory, their fertile territory, and were pushed into mountains. And when it comes about the state policies, others like, as I told, that most of the rivers of Afghanistan, they are originating from the Hazara land. But if you go and see that these hydropower plants where they are built, they are mostly built when these rivers are going out of the Hazara. An example is the Kajaki Band, or the dam which was built on the Helmand River. That's, the river is originating from the Hazarajat, but the dam with the power plant was built on when it goes out of the Hazarajat, and that's quite has a history of it. If anyone wants to study it more, you can check Tamim Ansari's book Games Without Rules, and his father worked there, and he is quite familiar with that project. So, and then we have also lack of investment by the governments, like on roads. And if you check the connectivity maps of Afghanistan, all the roads and the streets, they are when they are connecting south and north or east and west, they are bypassing Hazarajat and going round and round in a circle, but not crossing the Hazarajat. And that actually says something. The biggest example we have, Junbish Roshnai, which was in Junbish Roshnai, we saw that a power project was rerouted just because not to cross the Hazara area, and that has a history of it. But another source of which could contribute to the Hazara poverty, could have contributed to the Hazara poverty. You can see it on your screen. This is data from Barnett Rubin's book. In this, you can see that the share of political elites in Afghanistan. What he calls as old regime, it is from 1929 till 1979. So here you can see that almost the share of Hazara among the political elites, like governors, district governors, Wulaswal and Wulaswali, and Wali, or provincial governments, and ministers and deputy ministers and head of departments and all. You could see that there is no mention of the Hazaras. Maybe on that H.S.A.I from your right side, the fourth column, you can see that there is almost none. So maybe they were Hazara, but please bring that slide back. So there you can see that, and that's the data. We do not have about the state data about the state bureaucracy, that how many percent of the state bureaucracy were the Hazaras. And I'm arguing that in every country, even in the US, it's the largest provider of employment. So in Afghanistan, Hazaras were excluded from state employment to a great extent. Only we could see in that slide that it starts from 1978 and 79 when the leftist coup took place, and then we see that some Hazaras are promoted in the government, and we see that it goes down in the Taliban first round of government. So, and please move to the next slide. In the next slide, you will see that that is I have developed that slide. So that is, there is a slightly change in the Hazara representation in the government. It goes up, the indicators that, Hazaras were added, represented in the state political elites. So, but yes, please. Yeah, here you could see that gray line is the Hazaras. You see that there was a peak in post 2001, and again we have seen that post 2021, when the Taliban took power for the second time, the Hazara share in the political elites and also in bureaucracy is going down. But still, we do not have enough data about that to make this argument. So, but let me talk a little about post 2001. Because there was foreign aid was channeled towards Afghanistan, and quite a huge amount, like more than $150 billion, which came to Afghanistan or more. And there you see that, please move to the next slide. But there was another problem that, these aids were targeted in the areas which were insurgency, like, there was a tendency to buy people's loyalty for the government of Afghanistan or for the foreign intervention, the US intervention through aid, give them money. And it was actually a way to bribe that. And, insurgency were more active in the south and southeast. And you can see the reflection in this map. It is by a couple of scholars who have studied this phenomena, and they have seen that areas which were high conflict intensity, in those areas poverty were less. In the areas like Hazarajat and Badakhshan, in this area which was before 2014, let's say, or low level of conflict intensity, poverty was higher. So there you see that foreign aids contributed to these economic imbalances, and that's the only study which I found is studying this phenomenon of foreign aid. And the thing is that Americans were quite they were quite clear about that. They had named one of their military guideline as they had named it money as a weapon system in Afghanistan. Money as a weapon system. And we have this saying by David Petraeus, General David Petraeus. I think he was the head of ISAF at that time. He's saying money is my most important ammunition in this war, in the war in Afghanistan against the Taliban. So that says a lot about why the ethnic imbalances, the poverty was higher among the Hazaras, because this area was low. There was not actually conflict or insurgency, and that's why they were neglected. So that happens elsewhere also, the same thing. And there are some explanation why, maybe it could explain why the Taliban started taking the north, because people in Badakhshan, and Badakhshan became later on, a center for the Taliban, and that was because people in Badakhshan, they saw that, unless you do not create conflict, then the foreign aid will not come towards you. Now I will say a couple of words about post 2021. Still, we do not have good data on that. Because international organizations that are sending aid, they do not publish data based on ethnicity, that who gets how much, which ethnicity gets how much. So, and the biggest problem with the WFP, which is the largest provider of foreign aid to Afghanistan, in post 2021, It says in their website that, our priority is to work with the local authorities. And, what if local authority is biased against some specific ethnic group or community? And then there's no question about that, And that's, we have actual journalistic report that, the Taliban gave, even in places like Daikundi, the Taliban gave their, the aid to which were targeted, were sent to this Hazara area. The Taliban interfered, and they gave it to their own loyalists in those area, or people even came from outside the Hazara area and they took those aid. We have those journalistic reports. So overall, my conclusion is that, of all these three hypotheses which I proposed here, the third hypothesis, the state intervention, the state policy is the largest factor for why the Hazaras remain poor comparative to other major ethnic groups in Afghanistan. Thank you. It is a work in progress paper. I would appreciate your insights and your feedbacks.
Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat. Now I kindly invite Ms. Regina Paulose, international criminal law attorney and author at Counter ICL, to present her paper about recognizing crimes perpetrated against Hazaras in Afghanistan. To mention, the paper is written by both Ms. Regina Paulose and Timothy Franklin, founder of the National Schools of Journalism and Public Discourses. It will be presented by Ms. Regina Paulose. Ms. Regina Paulose, the stage is with you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone. I wanted to apologize because it's very early in the morning here in the U.S., but I was so excited to see that this conference was taking place, and it's the name of the conference is actually the name of the paper that we published back in February in 2023. And we actually consulted a lot with Homira and Mehdi, who both are leaders in your community in the UK. So what I'm not going to take very long. I just want to make sure that I make some points because I suspect that all of you are going to hear the same kinds of themes throughout the day. And I appreciate what the last speaker just said, because that kind of feeds into some of the things that I'll be talking about. So what I want to first start off by saying is that the paper that we published in February of 2023, the goal was actually to raise awareness about the genocide against the Hazara, or that's being perpetrated against the Hazara, because there was little information or knowledge about it among lawyers in the American Bar Association. So our audience was a little bit, it's broad because the paper obviously is public, but it was really to educate them because we wanted to figure out ways in which to use justice and accountability processes to help prevent and stop any further escalation or of the genocide, and just stop it if we could. So what we ended up doing was embarking on this journey and learning so much about your community. And every single time I hear from more Hazara people, I learn so much more about the situation, because the situation is actually parallels a lot of other situations that are in the world with other groups. So it's been nonstop learning, and I know that the violence and other forms of persecution against the Hazara have not stopped. So with that being said, what the paper does is that it outlines from Abdurrahman Khan's time until present how genocide has unfolded. And we used Gregory Stanton's model of the warning signs. And to be honest, the reason why I like using that one is because it's pretty clear cut understanding of what those signs and stages are. And there isn't really it's usually there what we're looking at. And so what we ended up doing was using that model to determine that there were these warning signs that existed. And Dr. Stanton has 10 signs now. He used to have 8, but now that there are about 8 signs or stages, as he calls them, of genocide. And so one of the things that the paper, if you read it, and again, it's detailed, but not too long, but very detailed, is that it talks about the fact that a lot of these situations that we talk about, so for instance, the last speaker was talking about poverty and the use of, you know, these land confiscations. Well, what we connect in this paper is the fact that the land confiscations are part and parcel of a genocide. It's all one unified event that's happening. But sometimes the international community, when they respond to certain things, they piecemeal these events and they think that they're not connected. And so one really great example I can use is the Rohingya genocide, because in the Rohingya genocide, which has been, the warning signs were present since the 1960s. The laws came into effect by the 1980s. They've gone through 3 genocidal purges. The one that most people know about was in 2017. But in that specific case, the fact that they can't marry who they want, they can't have, they're restricted on how many children they can have, they can't practice their religion, all these, what we think of as just human rights abuses or violations, are actually part of the genocide, is part of the policy in order to exterminate the group. And so we see this pattern here also with the Hazara community in Afghanistan. So one of the things that we wanted to do is we didn't look at every single event that happened. And that was because we did have, you know, we couldn't write a 30-page paper, but we did write as much as we could. And we looked at the biggest events possible that still, even with just the few events that we looked at, was enough to, in our opinion, establish a pattern of genocide. And I think that that was, it's very important. And I think one of the things that's very important that we took away from doing this was the fact that most people just talk about today. And so they think that this is something that's new, so maybe it's not a genocide yet, and it's just violence, and it's because of who's in power, but not really. If you look at really the history of what's been going on, it has been something that has been ongoing for quite some time. And so it does, as with any group, it deserves to be recognized, and it definitely deserves to, needs to have action. So what are the takeaways from the paper, and what are the things that we're asking for? What we asked the lawyers to think about, and what we need to start, what we're asking the international community to do in the paper, was very simply that, number one, that the genocide should be recognized. And I should mention that, you know, just because a genocide is recognized doesn't mean it stops. Obviously, we can see that in a lot of cases. But it is really important sometimes for that recognition to happen, because it helps to refocus policy, and it helps for people to focus on what kind of actions need to be taken. So sometimes when we look at, when people talk about Afghanistan and they just say Afghanistan, they may not have an understanding of how many different ethnic groups there are, what kind of situations these ethnic groups are facing, and how they may all have different needs. So we really do need to think about what we're saying when we talk about that. So the recognition of the genocide is one. The second, and I will say this too, and I like to always caution people, it's not the be all and end all of everything either. But it is important, I think, that we start talking about this properly, because it is a crime. And I think sometimes people think that when you say genocide, it's, you know, this big brass ring and it's very hard to reach, but we're talking about a crime. Just like you would say somebody was murdered, you say what it is so that you can figure out how to resolve that issue. So in this case, we have the same problem. The second thing that we've asked for is more documentation to take place. Is specifically in our report, we asked the State Department to actually go through and do an investigation, because that usually helps for them to understand where there may have been a misunderstanding, or maybe not the correct policy approach to the situation. But outside of the United States, I still think it's important for everybody who is engaged with your community to do this kind of documentation. I'm very happy to hear that your groups are also doing documentation, and I hope that you will be able to lead in that effort. I think one of the things that I found in working with different groups is that they don't lead their narrative, they don't lead in their efforts, and it makes it really hard, because later on people have a misunderstanding about what's actually going on. So I think conferences like this, where it's led by your community, is wonderful because you all get to frame the issues, you all get to focus the topic, and I think that's really, really important. The last thing, or the last two things I should say, is we also call for a referral to the International Criminal Court. Now, as you are aware, there's already a referral for Afghanistan, but one specifically about the Hazara, and that the ICC should look into that, since that bigger referral is already sitting there. And I think it's important to, to have that request made. I would encourage all of you to come to different spaces too, because I noticed that there is a lack of this genocide being discussed in other spaces. So for example, and this is the last thing I'm going to close with, in 2025, in October of 2025, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, which is one of the biggest organizations in the world on genocide scholars gathering together, they'll meet, and it would be really great for you all to come and present there, and so that more people, especially scholars who work in this area, know about the genocide, and that they understand from your perspective. And it looks like you all are doing great scholarship, so I hope that you'll be able to come and participate. But with that being said, I'm going to end here. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, congratulations. Again, this is a really great conference, and I'm glad we could participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Regina Paulose, for such wonderful insights. One more time to re-mention, dear participants, if you have any kind of question, you can put that in chat box, and please avoid raising hands. Now we'll hear from Ms. Mechid Paiman, MSc Space Physics and Engineering from Technical University of Denmark, public speaker and host at Bulaq, who will present her research on the Hazara Genocide Archive. Ms. Paiman, it is your turn.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me. Thank you very much for the introduction. I will be sharing my slides just so that you can see, what's going on. So, like this. All right. So my name is Mechid Paiman, and I'm representing Bulaq Analysts Network, which is this like a volunteer organization with one of its main projects, namely being this Hazara Genocide Archive. And it kind of relates to the previous speakers of today, but specifically, this archive is some data collection that we want to gather on the Hazara Genocide that has happened over the many, many years and decades, to namely present, collect all of the data so that we can present this to the world in a proper forum so that it can lawfully be submitted and justice can then be sought. Yes. So just going into what this project is, it is based in Bulaq Analyst Network, where we collect the data on these mass killings of Hazaras since the year of 2000. And these are the mass killings that have occurred in Afghanistan and in Pakistan specifically. The project is in partnership with the Hazara Organization for Peace and Equality, namely HOPE, where we document the victims and also the attacks for mass attacks and individual attacks happening. Yeah. And why we do this is because, just as I said, to raise awareness globally by documenting and really writing down everything in one place to show that this is actually a genocide and these are the war crimes that have happened, because we have Hazaras have many times tried to actually, put a voice to this and raise this awareness, but then the Western society has a level of has a standard that sorry, just making sure that you can still see me. There you go. Yeah, so we need to raise our level to the standard of the West so that they can actually accept this as a genocide, and we can move on with this within their laws, if you can say so. So this project wants to be kind of an intermediate between the victims and the recognized organizations, for example, the International Criminal Court. And in this way, we will use these documents and this database to namely seek justice for these victims. So we know that from the 1890s up until 1998 or the early 2000s, there have been tens of thousands of Hazaras killed. And after the 2000 point, up until the present, we've estimated approximately 4,500 Hazaras killed. And these are um, from various different media around the world that has so that's where the estimate comes from, these 45,000 or 4,500. And this is what Balak is focusing on from 2000 up until the present, because it's already a big chunk to start off with. Where, as I mentioned, the attacks mainly happen in Afghanistan. Around 75% of the attacks, of the estimated attacks, have happened in Afghanistan, and around 25% occur in Pakistan. But we're focusing on these two places specifically. And how do we collect this data, and what kind of data is it? We've split it up into these three data categories. The first one is what we call the basic data. This is name and age, gender, parents, date of death, and place of death, for example. So this basic data, the simple stuff, and this is also what is public to everyone. Out of the estimated around 4,500 killings, we've collected so far almost 60% of the basic data version. And then we have two other categories, which are private. These are not public because of security reasons, simply for the victims themselves and their relatives. The first one is sensitive data. So this is more specifically the address, email, phones, and sometimes if we do interviews with the relatives, for example. And these 10% that we've collected of the sensitive data is, of the estimated 4,500. So we're still collecting, obviously. And the third one is what we call consent letter, which is simply what we need for a lawful submission to the different criminal courts around the globe. Mm-hmm. Now, the work phases that we are currently in the first one, which is the data collection phase. This is where we simply have people on the ground in Afghanistan and in Pakistan who go around and collect all of this data that we need for each individual victim. And it's a big work, it's a big task, and we also make sure that these people are equipped with the right amount of equipment that they need to walk around and do this. But there is also a big risk to it, obviously. And then once we have all this data collected, we move on to the data analysis phase, which is the second phase where we really go into the roots of what this data means and what we can do with it. And then we can, once we've kind of straightened this out, we will move on to the functionality and presentation phase, which is the last one. And by functionality and presentation, we basically mean that we need to make this data available and understandable for people, so that they can use it to move on in any process that we can to seek the justice, right? So it needs to be able to be easily accessible. If anybody wants to do any more, analysis based on gender or based on the location geographically, then they need to be able to do that. And so far, that's not possible because we're still in the collection phase. So what we're doing right now is simply just collecting everything into our database. And then we need to make it functionable so that people can use it and it can be, used by a different group of people with different requirements, for example, or different skill sets. Now, the databases that I'm talking about are public, as I mentioned. Everybody can simply go to hazaragenocide.com, where you see the entire database. That is the database. And so far, we have registered around 2,500 victims in here. out of the estimated 4,500, right? So you know there's about 2,000 victims that are missing potentially. Also, in collaboration with Hope, they have started, before the Hazara Genocide Archive came to be, to pinpoint where the attacks are geographically in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan. So these are Google Maps, simply put, where all of these attacks are pinned down to see where there's a lot of attacks and where there's fewer. And the attacks in Pakistan, they have registered around 200, both mass killings and individual killings. And the attacks in Afghanistan so far, they have registered 91 mass events and 101 individual events. You can, by these QR codes, easily go into the links and find and look at the maps. So some of the challenges that occur with this project is, obviously, as I mentioned before, data collection becomes increasingly difficult, especially after the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. One of the things that we are simply restricted to do now is that the people that do the data collection, so go over to other people's houses, the relatives' houses, and talk to them and collect the data, they need to go to the place, collect the data, immediately they must upload it to our database, and then they need to delete it from their own equipment, from their own phones or laptops or whatever, before they leave the house again. Because if they're caught outside of the streets, then they need to be without any possession of any kind of data. And that is one of the restrictions that we do have generally, but especially after 2021. Then we also have the challenge of the fact that this is a zero budget, completely volunteer driven project. And by that, we mean that everybody is putting in their own free time to this work, whether it be data collection, whether it be, maintaining the database or anything else. Obviously, we do make sure that these expenditures are being covered in a sense, so that people on the data collection side, for example, don't have to pay for their own phones or equipment or microphones or internet access in that sense. So it does go down to zero in the end. But this is a volunteer driven. So that's also one of the main challenges that we do have. And this leads to security risks, security and risks concerns as well, as I mentioned before. And also, when we go further, the legal challenges and bureaucratic delays that also happen within, in order to, we need to be able to understand how to go in these paths and what to bring forward with the documentation and stuff. Yeah, so that was it, very briefly. If you do have any more, like, want more information, or if you have some time for yourself that you really want that dedicated to this project, then you can easily go into hazaragenocide.com or bulak.org and contact us in any way possible. It's very clear in there. And also take a look at the hazaragenocide.com database yourself, to really see how it is exactly that it's set up. And yeah, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. So I just want to thank the conference for inviting us, and thank you for your time.
A special thanks to you, Ms. Mechid Paiman, for your important work in this area. Dear presenters, we have some questions asked in chat box, and we kindly ask you to answer the questions. The first question is asked from Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat. Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat, can you hear me? Mr. Seerat?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, that's good. So the question is here that did you have a chance to look into the taxation policy and the various democratic governments that significantly impacted the Hazaras? For example, the current ongoing taxation ban on economic activities, ban on
Sir, I cannot hear you, but I can see the question. So should I answer?
yeah. Can
Yes.
you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Please go on.
Mm-hmm. For example, the current ongoing taxation ban on economic activities such as printing and freeze, irregular taxation on education institutions on Hazara lead, and the
Again, your voice cut off, so I will continue with the answer. Uh, Unfortunately, there is not data, but anecdotal evidences are there. The way we see that, they are taxing these street vendors. They are taxing them quite hugely, like, $60 from 1 square meter. If you occupy 1 square meter in a corner of the city in Barchi, for example, you have to pay something around $60 monthly to the Taliban authorities. And actually, when it comes to these educational centers like courses, tuition courses and all, it is quite arbitrary. So there is not any uniform law in their taxation law. The Taliban soldiers or commanders, they will come well and say that, we will let you do your business or teach your students, but you have to pay us this much. So it is on agreement is based on that, and quite it is extractive. So if anybody has a chance to take a look on the book Why Nation Fails, the Taliban are quite the example of where he refers as to the extractive institute. So this is the very, very apt example of that book, which talks about productive and extractive institution. And Taliban are quite, an apt example on that. They are taxing people heavily from, everything, almost, from street vendors to courses to everything, to shopkeepers and all lots of. I heard, family people from relatives and family who are closing their shops because saying it's no longer profitable for us. We cannot pay the Taliban their high taxes, and sometimes they are collecting taxes from the last 20 years. Say, well, we are going to tax you from the last 20 years, and that's they are people of no law, so you cannot argue with them. And of course, they are channeling this money from people and in their army or military group after all. So, and that's actually empowers my argument that the Hazaras are not in the Taliban army, and army is one of the biggest institution that offers job and payments, and again Hazaras are excluded from this dispensation of army and militarism and all. So that is actually strengthen my argument, I guess. Thank you. There is another
thank
question
you.
by Samim also. So if you want me to answer that one also.
Yes, please answer the question.
Again, about aid from outside, we do not have information. There was this group of the Hazara activists and Hazara organization tried to get in touch with WFP country director through some organization in the UK, and asked about data and how much aid goes to where, and they did not provide only a small promise that we are trying to be fair, we are we are not influenced by the Taliban, something like that, which is not a good argument that there's aid distribution would be fair. From journalistic reports, as I said earlier, there are evidences that the Taliban are interfering with the aid distribution, and they are quite, I heard, that they are saying, well, you Hazara have supported the previous government and you have benefited from that. Now it is our turn, so you should not. And they have told this specifically to people who are going on those WFP distribution centers in Kabul. They have been told this directly. I have, have the anecdotal evidence for that.
There are two questions directed to Ms. Regina. Did you see or shall I read the questions, Ms. Regina?
I saw the questions and I actually put the answer in the chat, but just so that everybody else knows, the first question was about the title of the paper, and that was just a commentary. Broken frame, shattered glass is about the genocide framework and how it's not properly being applied to the Hazara situation. And the second question was about how to engage the U.S. To bring more awareness about the genocide here. And my recommendation there is to engage. There's usually one or two senators or representatives that really are very passionate about certain issues, and I think you'll be able to find them. But the other person that you should, I think, probably at the top of your list should be Ambassador Van Schaak, and she's the ambassador on global justice. And you'll see her, she's a very active Twitter account. She has a team, they're part of the State Department. And I think if you start there, you might be able to then find your way into getting more information to the right people about the genocide. But I also would encourage you, and I didn't put this in the chat, but I will say this, there are a lot of other places that I do recommend you all, everyone in the community try to engage, which is the European Union, of course, the UK, we cite to the UK report because the UK has been looking at this, and specifically its Member of Parliament, David Alton, who's been leading that initiative. And I think some of you may work with James Joseph. So I would stay connected with that, seeing if the UK could also mobilize and do something. And then also, I think it's very important, and this database, by the way, that the last speaker has put together is excellent. Mechid, I think that's her name. Sorry if I said your name wrong, but it's a really great database, and I think it would be good if that is shared with a lot of the UN rapporteurs, especially the one on Afghanistan. I know he mentions the Hazara, I think once in a while, but I would encourage you to continue communicating with him and with other rapporteurs as well. Sometimes people think you should only talk to the rapporteur that's assigned to that country, but a lot of these themes deal with other rapporteurs. So for instance, there's a rapporteur on, I believe, on the right to truth, that you should definitely engage that rapporteur as well. So that's just some examples, and they're not very precise titles that I've given, but take a look at that and it should be helpful. And I think those were all the questions for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Regina Paulose, for answering the questions.
There is one question for me by Muhammad Alimizada. Should I answer that?
Yes, please.
Alimizada is asking that, if there are feasible solutions for each of the hypotheses which I proposed. Well, the first hypothesis on the cultural change, cultural transformation, well, I said, well, that's not the biggest cause or factor for our poverty, but that has a role in that. And, it is quite tough to convince people, okay, the small amount of capital that you have, so invest in yourself and do not spend it in other countries. And there are lots of, religion and beliefs and emotions are involved in that. But for the second hypothesis, there are small initiatives by the Hazaras themselves. Like, we see small water dams are built in Daikundi, also in Joguri, several of them. And actually, I talked with one person who is living in Joguri, in close to that, a small dam that people themselves built. So, and he was quite positive that, it has contributed a lot to agriculture. So that's, it's a very good initiative that, these small projects that people themselves are taking up. And, we have other small initiatives like, those who are outside the diaspora, they are contributing in building schools and, other institutions, buildings for institution. And And that's, I think it's that's what we could do, and we could to counter that part. But on the state level, we do not have much chance for now, as long as the Taliban are not willing to share power or democratize in some way, which now, as Professor Meli mentioned, that that the possibility that the Taliban even gets more extremist is that possibility is higher than the degree of that possibility, then the likelihood of that possibility, then let's say, well, they will be reformed or transformed. There we do not have much role to play right now. Thank you, Olemi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seerat. Miss Bitul, she's presenting next if she is there. If not, we can move on to the panel discussion.